So you can see here that I can choose between any class because I'm a human, and that's kind of one of the big bonus to being a human is that basically you can choose whatever you want. You don't get a plus to your con or your dex the way that dwarves and elves do, respectively. On the other hand, you don't get the minuses to your, I believe dwarves have minus to their intelligence, elves have a minus to their constitution. So you don't get that on the other hand. So that's definitely a good thing if you're playing a human. So I don't think I'm going to play these classes myself, but if you want to have the easiest time in the world, cleric is probably the easiest dude to play. The cleric is basically, up until Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition, cleric was the most overpowered characters in these games. Essentially, a cleric is like a fighter, only he can't use edged weapons. There's some mythology actually around that. So if you've attended, say, your college graduation, for example, you've probably have the guy bringing out his ceremonial mace. This goes back to the days of medieval times when, say, the University of Paris was founded or Oxford University was founded. Universities were founded to teach religious people, basically. Also a little bit to teach people how to read and write, because that wasn't the most common thing back in the day. In fact, it was very, very rare to be able to read and write. In fact, even rarer to be able to read than it was to write, which sounds crazy to the modern day viewer, but trust me, that's how they did it. So because of the fact that, it was manned by the clergy and basically made as a big school for training the clergy, everybody in there was clergy. There was some classic, again, mythology around that said that essentially the clergy couldn't wield anything that could do damage to anybody. Well, do damage. They can still do damage. They can't puncture the skin, because that some sort of Christian religious thing against that. So instead, they would have to use maces and stuff that basically you could beat somebody about the head with, still, fracture their skull, but it make their nose bleed, I guess, but would technically not break the skin, so that made it okay. So that's actually included in Dungeons & Dragons in Baldur's Gate as well. It seems kind of a weird thing, and a lot of DMs, when they play, they just say, this makes no sense, whatever. But there is that little bit of kind of kooky mechanics in that. You can see that clerics can take a couple of different gods in the game. This is based, again, in the Forgotten Realms series. There are a lot of smaller sub-gods in Forgotten Realms. Forgotten Realms is worth going out and reading up on a little bit if you want to. You can see here, Helm is basically he's the god of watchers and protectors. So they're kind of like warrior priests who they can cast True Sight, which Seeking Sword. Also, I think it lets you see invisible folks as well. Seeking Sword, it explains what it is right down here, so I won't get too much into it. To your Priest of Lathander, as you can see, the good god of renewal, creativity, and youth. So you've got some things in here that you can do. But what all clerics have in common are basically two things. So in addition to basically being fighters, they don't get quite as many hit points, but they get a lot of hit points, and they can use all the armor that fighters use. So that means that they can wear full plate, and actually they can still cast spells in full plate. So they're basically walking. You can use a cleric as a tank almost as well as fighters use as a tank. The only real difference is they aren't quite as good as with weapons. You'll want to probably use them to heal people a lot, and otherwise they're they don't get quite as many hit points. They still get a pretty good amount of hit points, though. I have played clerics a lot in this game in the past. I'm not going to do it this time, but that's definitely an option if you want to play the game and experience that. There is, I believe, a cleric that you can get. I believe actually Amonem is a cleric you can get after, I think, a couple levels in. So it's not like the end of the world if you don't play a cleric. You also get a bunch of healing potions up front, so you can use those instead of using the cleric's ability to heal. Getting it slightly ahead of myself, the other two things that a cleric can do are, one, they can cast spells. So they don't cast mage spells. So they're you're not going to be casting fireball and that kind of thing. the spells that clerics cast are buff type spells. If you play World of Warcraft, you probably already know this because the clerics there are the same as clerics in this, in the sense that they're casting spells that help out your own party instead of spells that hurt the other guys. There are a couple spells, especially if you play as an evil cleric, that you can do that with. But all in all, that is what a cleric does. And the other thing that a cleric does, just in case he wasn't overpowered enough, clerics can also turn undead. Clerics are the only class, in fact, that can turn undead. Turning undead, basically what that means is you have like 5 skeletons coming at you. The cleric holds up the cross. Cleric holds up a cross and says, "Undead, be gone," or whatever. And they either run away, or if the cleric's high enough level and the undead's low enough level, they actually disintegrate. If you're evil, you can turn the undead and make them do your own bidding. But yeah, that's actually in general called turning undead. So that is the big thing that a cleric can do on top of everything else. So that, and the paladin is actually the other one that I might end up playing, and haven't really made up my mind completely here yet. So the paladin's the other kind of slightly overpowered class. Paladin's more of a straight up fightery class, very similar actually to the cleric. The paladin actually is not in the original Dungeons and Dragons game, which is a game that came out in the mid 70s based on Chainmail, which was a war game. That had just 4 basic classes. Fighter, actually it's 7 classes technically, but fighter, magic user, which became mage, cleric, and thief. And then the other 3 quotable classes were dwarf, elf, and halfling. You can tell those are actually races in advanced Dungeons and Dragons and in later versions as well. So you can see the paladin basically is a fighter who can do some spell casting. They also get, actually, I believe they do get the limited ability to turn undead. They also get an ability to lay on hands, which basically allows them to like heal. I think it's 2 hit points per level, so it doesn't start out doing much, but it can add up. In this game, there are some cool little kit types with that come with the paladin. You could be a regular paladin, you could be a cavalier, which is maybe not the most accurate way of terming this because there are no horses in this game. But I mean, so cavalier literally means person who rides a horse, so I would kind of be going against it. Although I think paladin is technically a Muslim term. So, and these paladins are based on like Christian knights, so it's not necessarily that's maybe anachronistic as well. I'm not sure, but you can see. I mean, cavaliers basically they're guys who go around and specialize in battling classical evil monsters, like St. George fighting the Dragon of Temptation. That would be a cavalier in this. Inquisitor is essentially a dude who's going out trying to kill mages. And then the undead hunter is pretty self-explanatory. It isn't totally against things to just be a straight-up fighter. There are some really big advantages to just doing a straight-up fighter build. Fighters are they don't do anything but go up to a guy and hit him. And before 4th edition, fighters are kind of boring to play in my experience in the real game D&D. In this, you're always managing your whole party, so it's not as big of a deal. But fighters, they start out with the most hit points, they get the most hit points as the game goes by. So if you're concerned about dying too much, fighter's actually a really good class for this. Cleric's just as good, almost as good, I should say, maybe not quite as good. Fighters, they can wear any armor that you get in the game. They can wield any weapon that you get in the game. They can become super duper proficient with any weapon because they get a lot of weapon proficiency points down the line. So it's a good class. I mean, just because it's one of the base classes, that it's kind of vanilla, but the vanilla's good. 3rd edition added a bunch of stuff to fighters, like little feats that you can put in that kind of make them, I think, a step cooler. And then Pathfinder and 4th edition found their own ways to make them even more fun to play. But even though if you were like in like a classic Dungeons and Dragons group, maybe with like 5 other players and a DM, playing a fighter might not be the most fun thing to do in the world. In this, it's whatever. You can do it. Berserker, these are. I think Wizard Slayer is fairly, you can understand what it means by the name. You basically you get when you attack mages, you can go in and get them the cumulative spell failure penalty when you hit them. Also, you have some resistance to magic. It's not that great, but it does get it does add up over time. Then once you get past level 20, it really starts getting good. The only problem is, of course, you can't use any magic items except for weapons and armor. So that means no healing. Oh no, you can use healing potions. You can't use like a potion of giant strength though. That can be a pretty big thing. Berserker, is like the dude in Clerks. My love for you is like a truck. Berserker. Basically, your whole thing is you go berserk. The downside of Berserker, I believe, is that once you go berserk, you can't necessarily turn it off. And in fact, you can't turn it off. It turns itself off. And you gain hit points, but then you lose those hit points at the end of the berserk spree. So you can't actually die as a result of getting out of Berserker. So it's a little bit dangerous, especially for your main character. Minsk isn't a Berserker, but he has the ability to go berserk. So there isn't necessarily a need to do that, but it is kind of a fun power to play with. It does make you kind of badass. You can see it gives you a plus to hit, plus to damage, minus to armor class, which is good. We'll explain armor class and all that as we get into the actual gameplay itself. And then Kensai is essentially, it calls it a sword saint. Basically, it's, I guess you can kind of think of it as like a samurai, like a swashbuckling kind of hero. They can go around and doesn't necessarily wear a lot of armor the way like a regular fighter might, but you can, you get that extra bonus to hit and to damage, no matter what weapon you're using. So you get that. You don't get to use missile weapons. So basically, you're going straight into fighting guys. You don't get to wear the armor. You get the initial bonus to your AC though. So if you're like a high dex guy, and you get the armor bonus from that, and you get like some bracers of defense, in the game, then you can still be pretty decent with this. There is a guy in Baldur's Gate 2 who is a Kensei, so there's no particular reason to maybe want to do this. You're going to see that character eventually, but it is a cool character to do. So, again, go your own way. By all means, play that guy.